Music here shut down. Let's get the camera here on. Everything should be good. I'm unmuted. Camera's on. I can at least see one comment. So this is the. I should probably put this down. That would be the next thing, is to make sure that the mic arm is actually down, close to my mouth, so that the people watching the video can hear the things that I'm saying, which is why I'm assuming you're here. Don't ask me why. I don't know what I have to say is important or meaningful, but sure, let's jump into this second installment of Apologetics Analyzed, where I try to do my best to charitably and honestly engage with the apologetics content that's put out there by people like Cameron Bertuzzi at Capturing Christianity, Trent Horn at the Council of Trent, I got to make sure I don't get it backwards. Braxton Hunter, I believe it is, at Trinity Radio, and a number of other people out there. The point of this series is to engage with their content in an honest, meaningful, and charitable manner, and providing sort of an atheological perspective on the arguments that they're offering, or the perspectives that the theists are offering. Because I think that there's a bit of that out there, but I think that we can certainly have more honest and genuine and charitable engagement with some of the content that these apologists put out there, rather than saying, oh, you're a moron, this isn't evidence, and I don't believe you, and then leaving it at that, because that's just not, that's not how we ought to. That's just not how we ought to engage, I think, personally, with the content that we're trying to engage with. I think it needs to be charitable, meaningful, and honest. So in this installment, we are going to be examining a video posted by Capturing Christianity. This was at his CCV1, the first Capturing Christianity in-person conference that was in August of, I believe, last year. And this is, it's not, well, I mean, it is live. Well, the video's not, but it was live. A presentation by Luke Barnes, as you can see here, on the fine-tuning argument, the teleological argument for God's existence. As you can see, Luke Barnes lives in Australia. He's, upside down under our feet, as it's often said. And this is at least at the time, it was live presentation by him, but he was not actually live in terms of his presence at the conference. Before I kick off, I do actually like Luke Barnes. I think that he presents one of the best, if not the best, version of the fine-tuning argument, the teleological argument, the design argument. You might hear me refer to it by all three of those names. The watchmaker argument's another name that it goes by. And him and Robin Collins, their versions are very similar. I don't know if I would say that they're really the same, but they are similar in that they attempt to present the teleological argument from sort of a Bayesian probabilistic perspective. And I'm not really going to get into that. I think we should let Luke present this, and then we'll respond as is necessary. As you can see here, we did fast forward a little bit through it because there are some there was just like a brief introductory period where Cameron was introducing who Luke Barnes was and everything, and there's not really a need to go through that. So it's about an hour-long video. We'll probably respond to the whole thing. This stream will probably go for at least 2.5 hours or so. It just kind of depends. Usually towards the end of these videos, I feel like I'm getting a bit repetitive and just bringing up the same objections because they're bringing up the same points that I'm objecting to. So usually by the time we get about the 40-minute mark in an hour-long video, it usually goes a little bit more quickly because I don't really want to keep saying the same things over again. But let's, without further ado, I guess, let's jump right into this and see what Luke Barnes has to say about our apparently fortunate universe.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good to see you to some extent, I suppose. So let me jump right in. The universe is no accident. That's going to be the topic for me today. Let me just remind you where I am. Here's a map of the world. So I'm up here in Australia, and you're all the way down there in Houston. So hopefully that's helped you a lot. Good. Let me jump in. I want to interact with some.
The only thing I want to say to anybody that watches this either live or on the replay after we're done streaming, is this actually what maps look like? Is this how they teach the world to people in Australia? Like, I get that this might be like a joke, and he's tried, haha, it's a joke. Australia is kind of the center there, but it might sound a little naive, but I'm actually curious to know, like, is this what the world map looks like to people in Australia? I would presume probably not, and obviously that there's somewhat of a joke in here, which I think is pretty funny. But I'm just genuinely curious if this is actually what the map looks like for for people in Australia. Anyway, let's continue.
People's views here specifically. So I'm going to start with some quotes from some people. I don't want to just sort of set up a straw man to then knock over. So here are three sort of common views that we hear if you read sort of atheist literature, what they say. Here's three things you'll come across fairly.
Before we really dive into these quotes, the one thing I want to say is the Richard Dawkins quote. I believe Richard Dawkins has said on numerous occasions that this quote, when used by theists, is oftentimes taken out of its context. I would say the same personally about the quote from Steven Weinberg. But essentially what this is really trying to do is, I want to give charity to Luke Barnes. I don't think that this is his intention, but at least for me personally, when I see things like this, quotes like this, all this is really doing is just quote mining, trying to paint this picture that atheism is intrinsically nihilistic. And oh, look, all these big name atheists agree atheism is nihilistic and pointless. Not every atheist is going to accept that. And quotes from a few atheists where they seem to indicate that under atheism the world seems rather nihilistic, and I would bet that I know for a fact that Richard Dawkins quote is taken out of context, because he said that this quote, when used, and that this is the only part that's cited, that it's very much out of context. The Steven Weinberg one, if I remember correctly, that's also out of God, where did Steven Weinberg write that down at? I cannot remember, but if I am remembering correctly, that's also out of context. And Bertrand Russell, I just don't really care what he had to say about this. Like, I just don't care about these quotes. I don't think any atheist is really going to care about these quotes. It just doesn't matter. What these men had to say about atheism, or that the universe seems pointless and indifferent and all this stuff, just doesn't matter. These are just opinions. So I guess what I'm saying is, I have to be honest here. No offense meant towards Luke, but I just don't see the point in these quotes. They just don't mean anything.
Commonly, first of all, from Richard Dawkins, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Now, he is a biologist, you may know, and he's trying to talk here about what's happening at bottom in the universe. And I mean, I don't want to start a turf war here. No, I do want to start a turf war here. So that's a question for physics. If you're asking what's happening at bottom in the universe, so we're going to jump into the physics soon enough. Steven Weinberg, who passed away about a month and a bit ago, a very famous Nobel Prize-winning particle physicist, said the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. An awful lot of work's being done in that quote by the word seems, you might notice. And finally, Bertrand Russell, man is the product of causes, which had no provision of the end they were achieving, his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs, but the outcome of accidental collocation of atoms. So the question here, I guess we could summarize as, why does Russell put the word accidental in that sentence? So we're going to do two things this morning. We're going to have a look at this idea. I think the universe is accidental. The other thing we're going to do this morning is, if you look over my shoulder, hopefully you can slightly see in the screen, you can see outside, the sun is slowly going to rise, and that's going to prove that the Earth is round. So we're going to do that this morning as well. So we're all looking forward to that. Good morning from Saturday. It's a lovely day. Okay. First argument, is the universe accidental because it has an element of randomness? Is the universe an accident because randomness plays a role in nature? Well, let me give a quote from someone who's given an argument like this, Alex Rosenberg, in his debate. Debate, I suppose. The thing with Sean Carroll and William Lane Craig and a bunch of other people a couple of years ago. So during that debate, 2014, here's what.
By the way, that was the what Luke Barnes is referring to is what was called the Greer-Hurd Forum, and that was the same forum at which Dr. William Lane Craig and Dr. Sean Carroll had their debate on God and cosmology. And I would say that, in my opinion, as educated as I may think it is, other people may not, I do think that Sean Carroll handedly won that debate, though I do think that William Lane Craig has always had a very strong showing. I know a lot of atheists don't like William Lane Craig, but I tend to think that's because he intimidates a lot of them. But the other thing I wanted to say, just with respect to this accidental equals random, so I just Googled the definition of accident, just because, in dealing stuff like this, I don't think it's wrong to just Google it really quickly. And I'm going to read from Wikipedia, because when it comes to definitions, Wikipedia, and obviously Wikipedia isn't a dictionary, but when it comes to definitions, they're a little bit more thorough. And again, this is just what Wikipedia says. An accident is an unintended, normally unwanted event that was not directly caused by humans. So it seems to me that when we talk about something's being accidental, accidental seems at least to be something of a normative term, that it's given with respect to some intention by some agent, generally a human, where consequences resulting from some desire or goal that a human had were not what was intended by that human, or did not result in what was intended by that human. So we would say it was accidental. I would argue that since the universe doesn't have any intentions, nothing about it can be accidental, because to say that something is accidental is to say that it is unintended, which is to presuppose the concept of intention, something I, along with, and I think even Luke Barnes would agree with this, most physicists would say the universe does not have.
What he said, quote, Darwinian processes succeed in building adaptations because they are driven by the second law of thermodynamics. I don't need to know what that is. All I need you to know is that the next sentence, the second law processes are probabilistic. They're all matters of objective probability. It's an inherently chancy process. Why does this make theism incompatible with Darwinism? God had an image, a representation idea of what he wanted when he produced us, and he achieved us. God is omniscient, and an omniscient agent wouldn't use an unreliable device in order to produce us. Why would God use a chancy method to make us, deciding to tie one hand behind his back?
Yeah, I don't really agree with this quote personally, but I get the sentiment behind it. The point that I would raise, that Alex Rosenberg is very loosely alluding to, it seems, in his quote here, is that rather than omniscience, I would point to God's omnipotence, and I would say that with respect to bringing about any state of affairs that which God could logically bring about, um, God wouldn't need any tools. He wouldn't need any devices or processes in order to do that. He wills it, and it is. So, with respect to that, in terms of the discussion that Luke is going to be walking us through in this video, I don't know why God would need to fine tune a universe in order to get life in it, because God could just put life in anything he created by will alone. He doesn't need to fine tune anything. He doesn't need to intentionally adjust or set up or structure anything. He doesn't need to use any tools, devices, or processes. He wills it, and it becomes. So, why did God fine tune the universe for life when he could have just created it to have life in it, regardless of its fundamental structure? With respect to specifically this objection, I would say that the fine tuning argument seems to be an ad hoc, or um, post hoc argument where it's trying to account for something after the fact. It's simply saying, well, God used devices or fine tuned the universe because we see that in the fundamental constants, even though it doesn't make sense that God would have needed to do that. So that just it makes no sense to say that God does anything to produce something, because if God is omnipotent, why does he need tools, devices, processes in order to do something? He's omnipotent. And if he does utilize, and this kind of relates to what Rebecca, Bread of Life, is alluding to with this comment, if God does want to use some sort of device or process, then that just means that the device or process isn't a means to God's ends, but is an end for God because he desires it. God doesn't need to use devices or processes or tools to achieve something. So in the instance that he does, it's not because he needs to, but just because he desires to do it that way. But then the question is, why does God desire to use tools to do something he doesn't need to use tools to do? And how do you know what God does and doesn't desire? Interesting questions, I think, that are raised by some of these statements.
So there's the argument. We see in nature a process which is inherently unreliable because it is inherently chancy, and that's not the sort of thing that God would do. The universe has a sort of irreducible randomness in it, and that's what points to the fact that it is accidental, that there is no mind behind it. To evaluate this, I think we need a deeper look at what this idea of randomness, and I see this word thrown around a lot, and especially thrown around in biology in discussions of Darwinism, and I think we need to go a bit deeper on what that word means. I think the best way of understanding this is through a theory that comes to us from mathematics that is called Kolmogorov complexity. Stay with me. The idea here is that you can measure complexity by looking at how easy it is to communicate. So if you have a string of characters, say a book or a message of some sort, the Kolmogorov complexity of that string of characters is roughly the length of the shortest description of the string. So let me show you two examples of this. Suppose I had to tell you the following 37 characters for whatever reason. Maybe it was a password or something like that. And there's the 37 characters. Well, I wouldn't read them all out. I'd just tell you hit 37 times. In that case, these 37 characters condense down to this shorter message, 37 threes. That is roughly what's going on with this definition. Now, because this is mathematics, there's a whole lot more complexity and ironically, behind the scenes, a lot more rigor, of course, but this is roughly what's going on here. So by contrast, if I had to tell you that, say, password, it's not obvious that there's any way I can summarize that for you. If I had you on the phone, I would just have to read out all of the digits. That seems to be a random collection of numbers, and that gives us, using Kolmogorov complexity, the idea of what a random string is. A random string is its own shortest description, meaning the quickest way for me to tell you what the string is just to read the string out. There's no way to summarize it. Any non-randomness in there is a way that I could tell you what the string is in a shorter, more compressed form. When
I should probably unmute before I start talking. I just want to say I don't disagree with how Luke Barnes is categorizing randomness here. I think that how he's categorizing it is very meaningful in science and physics and computer science. But I do think, at least from how he's presenting it, that how he's presenting randomness seems to be that this framing of what randomness is seems to be more related to like specifically physics and computer science. I don't think it's what the average person would understand when somebody used the word random. Now, I understand Luke Barnes is presenting an argument from physics. He's going to be getting into a lot of, physics and data from physics and stuff like that. So I can understand why a definition of randomness that is maybe a little bit more compatible with specifically physics would be meaningful. But I also think that we need to ensure that there's a level of palatability and understanding that when people use certain words, they may not mean these highly specified definitions that are being outlined here. But I do want to clarify, I don't disagree. I actually rather like the way that Luke Barnes is characterizing random here. I think that it is a very meaningful way to do it. And I think that it's even meaningful with respect to this discussion. But I did also want to just outline that, at least personally, I don't think this is how most people would understand the term random or randomness if they were to hear it.
I can't do that at all, I've got myself a random string. So from mathematics, we get this is the most widely used, most rigorous definition of what the word random actually means. So what about this string? It looks random. There doesn't seem to be any way that I could summarize that for you. You could look at that for an awfully long time and not see any particular patterns. But in fact, if I tell you that those are the digits 1000 to 1036 of pi, I can in fact summarize that sentence. Now, what that tells us is that randomness is something that I can prove. I can take a string, which might look random, and then suddenly out of nowhere produce this shorter description, and hey presto, this string turns out to be, in fact, non-random. So if a string is non-random, I can prove that it is non-random. What about randomness? If there is a string, can I actually prove that it is random? And the answer is no. Mathematics gives, in fact, the most emphatic no of them all. It's a no from Kurt Gödel. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about all the amazing things that this particular Austrian logician proved, but if you get a no from Kurt Gödel, it's basically the strongest smackdown.
I just wanted to say here, I paused there because I thought I might have been muted. When Kurt Gödel said no string can be proven to be random, I don't know if those were really his exact words, but I do recall him saying something along those lines. It seems to me that it seems that the issue here it lies more in that randomness seems to be. I really don't want to use like complex philosophical jargon, so I'm trying to find a way to word this that's going to be palatable for people. But it seems that what randomness is going to be given with respect to some standard. That like randomness, something is only random with respect to the standard that some agent like a human is using to understand it. Something might be I'm just going to use some people I see in the audience as an example. So Jason Torn, who's in the audience, something might be completely random to me. I look at a set of numbers and I'm like, this makes no sense. This is just random. These are just, somebody just sat on a keyboard and hit a bunch of numbers. But then Jason says, oh, no. This is the relation of this fundamental like thing to this fundamental thing. This number is the character is sort of a characterization, a constant that relates these two physical things. So randomness seems to almost be dependent on the knowledge that an agent has about some string. and that whether or not some string is random is really going to depend on the agent you're talking to and the standard that is being used to evaluate that string of information. Where one person may find it to be random, but another person may not. Is there any way to really show that there's an objective standard for what randomness is or isn't? And I don't think that there is. Again, I think randomness is going to be a subjective concept dependent upon the standard that one is using to evaluate the string that is being evaluated.
And you can get from mathematics. That is how a physicist summarizes mathematics. There are various sort of impossibility proofs that Gödel did in the 1930s, and all sorts of weird stories about his personality. But here's the thing. Here's what is provable mathematically. Almost all finite strings are, in fact, random, but no string can be proved to be random. That seems like an odd pair of claims. They are both completely mathematically provable. The reason is you can never be sure that someone isn't going to suddenly produce, oh, those are actually the whatever digits of pi, or
exactly. And it seems that what Luke is getting at here is, sure, you could sit on your laptop for 10 seconds and just hit as many keys as you possibly could in you're blindfolded and you're just smacking the keyboard. And you're going to say that the string, so to speak, that results on the computer screen from you hitting it is completely random. But let's say somebody decided to come in and say, oh, no, this means X, Y, or Z, or something like that. So again, it seems that Luke is kind of bolstering the statement that I made, that whether something is random depends on the standard being used to evaluate the string. Randomness isn't some objective feature of something. It depends on how something is understood. It's not randomness isn't given in terms of what something is, but what we understand about something. And in philosophy, the difference between those two are going to be the extensions, or the things that some concept applies to, and the intentions, or what a concept is understood to mean. And I'm going to type in the chat these words because they're probably not spelled as most people would imagine. But this is the difference. It's the difference between intention versus extension, where intention is the meaning or the understanding contained in a concept, and the extension are the things the concept could apply to. And so randomness seems to be understood in terms of what one means by random. How is one understanding the thing that maybe somebody else is calling random? And I think that's what's going to determine whether or not it's random. It's not going to be objective. But I'm also not like a professional statistician, so I could be completely missing the mark on this. But let me get this typed out and put in there so that people can see it. Because like I said, intention and extension. Extension is going to be spelled how most people would think, but intention isn't. It's going to be spelled with an S. And it doesn't mean intention as in what I intend to do. That's not what intention in this concept mean, or in this context means. Again, the intention of some concept is what the concept is understood to mean. And then the extension of the concept are the things to which you can apply the concept. And that's the difference, at least basically, between intention and extension of a concept. And so it's what I would say is that randomness is just an intentional concept. It's understood, or it's given in terms of what it's understood to mean, not in terms of what we can apply it to.
Or some other shorter description of a string. You can never.
So I guess in short, somebody might understand some string to be random, but that's going to be given in terms of what they understand about it, whereas somebody else might see the same string and think that it's not random given what they understand about it. But how would you objectively determine who is correct and who isn't?
Prove that a string is in fact random, in spite of the fact that almost all of them are, in a very precise mathematical sense. So what on earth does a scientist mean when they say that something is random? Given that any particular case, if you actually have a particular say, set of data in front of you, set of observations, there's absolutely mathematically no way you can prove that it is random in this very strong sense, this sort of very mathematically precise sense of what random means. What can a scientist mean by random if it can't possibly be this? Well, often it simply means uncorrelated or independent or unbiased. Actually, a good example here comes from evolution itself. We'll go back to Dawkins.
I just wanted to say that with respect to physics, I mean, Luke is a professional physicist. I'm not, so you can take what I say for what you think it's worth. But as I understand it, at least in specifically physics, randomness is just going to be sort of variables, the outcomes of which don't really follow some sort of pattern that you would be capable of determining. Sort of like it's that it's not deterministic. The outcomes of the random variables doesn't really follow some pattern, but it's just given by some set of probability distributions. But there isn't going to be anything determining the outcomes of these variables. The outcomes are merely going to be given in terms of a probability. At least in specifically physics, that's how I understand randomness. And as I understand it as well, most physicists would probably use the term stochastic rather than the term random, simply because random is a little bit of a loaded term in some senses.
Dawkins. He's talking about the role that mutation takes in evolution, and he says there are many aspects where mutation, the random changes to a genetic blueprint, is not random. All I would insist on is that these respects do not include anything equivalent to anticipation of what would make life better for the animal. So by random, all he means that if a cosmic ray comes along and knocks a bit of your DNA and changes it, right, there's just no systematic correlation between that and your offspring being better able to, it making life better for your offspring. But that is not randomness in any strong sense. It's just, independence. It's just that this had no way of knowing about that, even though both of them were fine. The way that this comes home for me as a cosmologist is if I do a simulation of the universe. Sometimes it's very useful within a simulation to be able to pick a random number. And in that sense, it's randomness in this sense. It's randomness in that it's just sort of chosen by...
I've been sitting here kind of mulling over what he's been saying. I think a good way to classify random, at least in a sense that most people are going to understand it, is just to say something is random if and only if it is not determined by any antecedent factors or conditions. But I almost guarantee there could be some people, maybe even a lot of people, that would find issues with that definition of random. But I think it's a meaningful definition, at least here, is that to say that something is random is just to say that there are no antecedent conditions or factors determining the outcome of the event in question or what have you.
By a process which is completely independent of the kind of process I want it to show in the universe. So I did my PhD on these sorts of methods. As usual, you can ask anyone about their PhD and you will get a very long conversation about what they actually did. It's behind me on the shelf right there. So here's the thing. If suppose every now and then you're running a simulation of the universe and, a light particle hits another particle, it needs to head off in some random direction, and so you use some method to pick what that direction is going to be. You do that using the digits of pi. Suppose the 14th digits of pi is a 5, so I'll head off to left somewhere or something like that. This is called pseudo-random numbers. If you're familiar with computers, you may have used these before. If you ran a simulation of the universe using the digits of pi to generate random numbers, it would be at the same time completely determined. Everything that happened would be completely written into the code. There would be nothing actually unpredictable or random, but it would be internally unpredictable if you were inside the simulation trying to look around at wherever is and wanting to know what comes next, it would be practically unpredictable. You would not know what random number is going to come out next for which way that particle of light takes off. At the same time, its overall properties, what we might call the macro state, could be very reliable and predictable. Often this is why we make the assumption of perfect randomness within physics, because sometimes it summarizes a whole bunch of things for us. For example, let's take those digits of pi again. In the first 10 million digits, how many sevens are there? Well, if you want to actually do that calculation, you can calculate the first 10 million digits of pi, and that's going to take you a while and a whole lot of effort, especially not memorize, calculate, right? Get out a piece of paper and get moving. Or you can assume that they're random, and suddenly it's a whole lot easier. There are 10 digits, right, 0 to 9. They appear roughly equally often, and so the number of sevens is probably a tenth of the total number of digits. And hey presto, there's about 1 million sevens in the first 10 million digits of pi. And I've answered that question without doing months and months of calculations on a whole bunch of pieces of paper. Randomness makes it easier to actually do a calculation. All of that is completely true, while the digits of pi themselves are, of course, completely, they're necessary facts. They are mathematical facts. There's absolutely sort of nothing actually random about them. They are what they are. What that tells you with this argument, which you hear in a number of forms, that randomness shows that the universe is an accident, the appearance of randomness shows that the universe is an accident, the fact that there are probabilities in physics, the fact that we have laws that are stochastic, that have some element of chance about them, that chance plays a role in evolution, that quantum mechanics, perhaps, shows that the universe is an accident, the fact that the universe is unpredictable shows that the universe is an accident. None of those work.
Well, again, remember, I personally, I think accident is going to be... To say that something is an accident is going to be a normative concept. It's going to be based on some standard one uses to evaluate the outcomes of an event. Did you intend for those outcomes to happen? Now, what most people, I think, are trying to argue is that all of these things that Luke is listing here, appearance of randomness, probabilities in physics, stochastic laws, all that stuff, I feel like what he's trying to say here is that, or I feel like what most people arguing here are trying to say is that what these show is that, or at least what these seem to indicate, is that there's no goal directedness to the universe. There's no intention to the universe doing the things that it does. Now, if all Luke means by the word accident is there's no intention behind it, then sure, these things, I would agree, show that the universe is an accident. But I think that accident is a little bit more specific than not based on intention or not goal directed. I think that accident means a little bit more than that. There's more connotative work being done there than just that. So I personally don't think that the argument is that these things show that the universe is an accident. I think what they show is that there is no goal directedness or intention with a T this time behind the universe doing what it does. Now, and this is the thing, like the word accident, I think is used a lot here, and it generally seems to mean a couple of different things when used in this context. It could mean randomness. It could mean no goal directedness. There's a variety of things, but I think the overall argument is that all of these things listed sort of on the left here, what they imply is that there's no goal directedness. That they imply that there was no intent for the universe to be doing what it's doing. There isn't a goal to the structure or the function of the universe, that they're just merely results of the way that the universe plays out, so to speak, as it evolves through time.
Because to say something as strong as even God can't know what the outcome is, well, your best hope of showing that, and even this doesn't entirely follow, but your best hope of showing that would be something as strong as Kolmogorov randomness, and that is completely unprovable from any finite or even infinite amount of data.
the question I would want to ask there is it possible for God to know both the position and the momentum of the same electron simultaneously? Not that I think saying no threatens God's omniscience, because I don't think that it does. But it is, I think, an interesting question that at least initiates a interesting discussion concerning God's omniscience and the limits of his knowledge, the kind of knowledge he has, what have you. But this isn't a discussion about that. I just wanted to bring that up.
About the world around us. All of these arguments fail for failing to understand the difference between sort of real and true randomness and what we actually see in the world around us. So perhaps it's not randomness. Perhaps, second argument, the world is accidental because it obeys mindless mechanical laws. Maybe we don't need to suppose there's a purpose behind the universe because the universe seems to run itself. And again, I'll give a quote so I'm not just picking up a straw man argument. Here's Sean Carroll from his book, The Big Picture. He says, and this is the title of the chapter actually, The World Moves by Itself. He goes on to say, the universe doesn't need a push. It can just keep going. At the deepest level of nature we know about, the basic notions are things like space-time, quantum fields, equations of motion, and interactions. There are no causes, whether formal, material, formal, efficient, or final. The universe doesn't need a mover. Constant motion is natural and expected. It is tempting to hypothesize, and he explains that he's going to do this with an open mind, that he could be wrong, but that the universe doesn't need to be created, caused, or even sustained. Given that it moves, constant motion is natural, perhaps existence. And the cause doesn't need an explanation either. So this is often heard in an even stronger form than this, which is the idea that explanation by scientific law and explanation by God simply exclude each other. You've got to pick one. You can't have both. So if an explanation by a scientific law comes along, that will replace explanation by God. The classic case here is we used to think that God throws thunderbolts, and now we know how clouds work. If you have a scientific...
The problem here is that I don't think anybody would argue that if we can explain things via natural mechanisms, that somehow means God can't or doesn't exist. I think that what's being said, at least the argument that I would make, and I feel confident in saying, having read many of his books and watched numerous lectures and speaks and talks of his, is that Sean Carroll would also agree that what it means is that God is superfluous as an explanation. Like, perhaps God does exist, but he just doesn't need to be used to explain things. We can just appeal to the naturalistic mechanisms that which the universe operates under. So I think I would agree with where I think that Luke is heading here, that you don't need to have this idea that, well, it's either natural or it's God, are like mutually exclusive. There's a sense in which I would agree with that. But what I think the argument really isn't that, well, if it's explained naturally, then God is dumb and stupid and he can't exist, that it excludes God. It's more just saying that it makes God superfluous. So, for instance, let's say that somebody's in a class on general relativity and they're learning about all the mechanisms, at least as far as we understand, about how gravity works and what it is and what it does and how it arises and all that stuff to the extent of the current knowledge that humans have. But then let's suppose this person says, I agree with all of that. Everything general relativity says about gravity and how it works and all that stuff is 100% true and accurate, but there's still another level yet that general relativity will never be able to explain, and that's the gravity fairies. The reason that general relativity works the way that it does is because that's how the gravity fairies wanted it to work. Sure, that might be true, but it's superfluous. It doesn't add any further explicative content to the model. We don't need to appeal to gravity fairies. even if they existed, to explain the things we're trying to explain. So by positing their existence, sure, they might, but it's superfluous, it's unnecessary and redundant. The things being explained naturally doesn't make God not exist or something. It just makes God superfluous as an explanation. We no longer need to appeal to God as an explanation. It doesn't add anything further, and we can just sort of shave it away with Occam's razor. I think that's the argument that most would make there.
Scientific explanation, you don't need God. And that supposedly is what shows that the universe is just an accident, because the whole thing is internally self-contained. It is just running itself. Now, this is slightly stronger than what Carroll is saying in those quotes, but it's of the same ilk. Now, it's important to note that actually the Bible doesn't see this. Right? The Bible doesn't make you choose between the two. So I'm borrowing this from Mike Strauss, who hopefully some of you know the work, but here's Psalm 104. He made the moon to mark the seasons. The sun knows when to go down. You bring darkness and it becomes night. All the beasts of the forest prowl. The lions roar for their prey and seek their food from God. The sun rises and they steal away. They return and lie down in their dens. Now, if you've ever been on, let's say, Twitter, you'll know the sort of person who might object to this by saying, oh, look, actually, it says lions seek their food from God, but we know that lions eat antelopes. Right, we've worked that out. And you can see that actually, like, the psalmist knew that as well, but there's no sort of choosing between the layers of explanation there. The lions both roar for their prey and seek their food from God. So there's a false choice being made here. The claim, we used to think that God feeds the lions, and now we know that lions eat antelopes. If you can see what's wrong with that claim, where do you think the antelopes came from, champ?
Well, I mean, antelopes are biologically developed creatures. See, I get the sentiment here that, sure, lions eat antelopes, but why are there antelopes? And why do lions feel compelled to eat them? Well, because God made it that way. But this is precisely the problem, is that once we've explained X, we just move God as an explanation to Y. And then once we've explained Y, we move God as an explanation to Z. Well, what's going to happen once we've explained Z without God? Then they're just going to claim, well, the reason that Z is the way that it is because God wanted it to be that way. God is an ill-defined explanation. It doesn't account for why things are the way that they are. It's just, well, God made it that way. That is just as explicative as me saying, and I know a lot of the theists don't like this, and there is a sense that I agree with them, but it's no further explicative than me saying, well, the flying spaghetti monster just wanted it that way. Saying God wanted something to be a way and that's why it's that way doesn't explain anything. Further, how do you know what God's intentions are? How do you know what he wants or what he doesn't want? And if you're just going to assume that what we see in the world is what God would have wanted, that seems very, very post hoc. How do you know God wanted it that way? And to just appeal to it being that way isn't really an argument, because that could be explained on a not God worldview. So I think I get the sentiment behind Luke Barnes, where he's going with this, but I just don't think it works for the same reasons that I outlined before. God is just superfluous as an explanation. And that's largely because God is ill-defined as an explanation. There aren't God particles, at least in the sense that I'm speaking about here, for the people that know what God particle means. There aren't God fields. There aren't God mechanisms. What mechanisms does God use to cause reality to be the way that it is? How do we know that? How can we measure it? To what degree of certainty can we measure this? These are questions the theist can't answer. And that's because God is not an explanation, because God is ill-defined.
Then hopefully you can see what's wrong with this one. We used to think that God acted in nature. We now know that natural events are produced by natural causes. There's a deeper layer here in responding to this, which is the question of what actually is a law of nature. If you think these are the sorts of things that can replace God, you better be able to tell us what a law of nature is. Now, very roughly, and this is a talk all on its own. Well, it's actually a couple of people's careers all on their own. But there are, within philosophy of science, which is not my field, of course, but there are roughly two views on what a law of nature is. The first is called the governance view, which is the laws of nature describe natural powers and dispositions. So if I say that electrons are charged and two charged particles will repel each other, I'm talking about real properties that real things have and the sort of dispositions about what they do to each other. I'm talking about natural causes and natural effects. That's called the governance view. There's a second view, which is called the regularities view. Natural laws describe patterns in natural events. So when I tell a story about two electrons repelling each other, what I'm really doing is summarizing a whole lot of things that happen in nature. But it's us. The natural events are just there, and as we try to summarize them, there's a sort of best system that summarizes the way things are out in the world, and that's all it is to be a law of nature. There's none of this natural powers underneath the surface.
This isn't incorrect at all, but I think that there's a better way to word it. It's often given as a Humean or a non-Humean view, based off of, obviously, of David Hume. And so a Humean with respect to the laws of nature is going to say something like that the laws of nature are nothing but patterns that we're capable of recognizing in the world, and that these patterns sort of pervade reality, and we can understand what these patterns are and describe them and use them to make predictions and what have you. Whereas a non-humane is going to say, well, no, the laws of nature aren't the patterns in and of themselves, but the laws of nature are something that gives rise to those patterns. So a non-humane view would be sort of this governance view that Luke is talking about, whereas a humane view, which is the view that I take to, that the laws of nature are just patterns that humans observe in reality and are capable of using to explain things and make predictions. This regularity type of view that Luke is talking about would be more of a humane view on the laws of nature. And I mean, Luke is exactly right. It's not just that this is a whole talk in and of itself. This is the whole ass careers of a number of philosophers of science in this discussion, because this gets into like instrumentalism versus or not constructivism, instrumentalism versus realism. There's a lot. This even gets into some topics in the philosophy of mathematics and stuff like that as to what the laws of nature are. Are they ceteris paribus laws, or laws that are only laws with respect to all things remaining equal in the system? To give an example of that, electrons don't behave at close to absolute zero in the same way that they behave at room temperature. Superconductivity. So are the laws really laws, or are they more just regularities that are observed at some level, all things being equal? The latter would be the view I take. The former would be the view that like sort of a non-human would take.
If you take the second view, as Carroll does, you'll think that causes aren't really down there in the ultimate furniture of nature. Now, if that's your view of the laws of nature, that both of these leave some open questions if you want to say that laws of nature can replace God. On the governance view, if you're totally happy searching for causes, the question is going to be why you would stop when you've reached the ultimate laws of nature.
Well, because there's nothing below that. It would be like saying once you've gone down into your house, all the way down into the basement, why don't you like buy a jackhammer and break up your basement floor? How do you know that there's not like a sub basement? How do you know that there's not something like I'm sorry, but that's kind of like that. I feel like that's what that's asking, because once you get to once you're at the floor of the basement of your house, most people are going to know there's no house below that. This is the foundation of the house. So and I realize that's might be a little bit of a contrived hypothetical, but it's just what I pulled off the top of my head. On the governance view, why stop the search for causes at the ultimate laws of nature? Because they are the ultimate laws of nature. There isn't anything below them. So that would be why. With the regularity view, why are there regularities at all? I would just ask, what do you mean when you say why? Why are you assuming that there is even a why there? There could just be regularities, and those just be nomological facts of reality. There are just regularities in reality, and that's all. There is no why. There just are. So the God doesn't seem to come in here, um, unless you're just sort of post hoc inserting God to account for things that you don't like being the case without God, which seems to be something that I'm not necessarily accusing Dr. Luke Barnes of doing that, but that is something I see a lot of theists do, that God is just inserted post hoc because they don't like the fact that the thing can be accounted for without.
Why you would stop with natural causes and not think that the universe as a whole needs a cause. That's obviously
Yeah, but what would indicate that? What do we have that would indicate that we would need to presume that? There doesn't seem to be anything.
pushing you in the direction of the contingency argument, various cosmological arguments. If you take a regularities view, as Carroll does, the question you've not answered is, why are there regularities in nature at all?
And just again, really quickly, that presumes that that's even a meaningful question to ask. I mean, it's like saying, why did you go to the store? Well, because I needed to buy food. Well, why did you buy food? Well, because I was low in my house. Well, why were you low in your house? Well, because I've been eating that food. Well, why were you eating that food? Well, because I was hungry. Well, why were you hungry? Because the human body requires sustenance in order to stay alive. Well, why does the human body require sustenance in order to stay alive? Like, at some point, you're just going to get to a point where there just is no further why. Like, it just is that way. So the second one, why are there regularities at all? The why is doing a lot of work there in terms of presupposing the principle of sufficient reason, that all contingent facts necessitate explanations for their contingency. And I would just reject the principle of sufficient reason. What's the argument for why I should be committed to the principle of sufficient reason? But we'll get into that, at least hopefully, a little bit later. Because I think that the principle of sufficient reason and the notion of contingency and necessity is very, very crucial, or important rather, to the teleological argument.
If the universe just is, and then we try to summarize it, why is science so amazingly good at summarizing the regularities that it sees in nature?
This is, and again, I'm just going to be honest here. This is like asking, why does a 3/4 inch wrench fit a 3/4 inch bolt so well? Because we designed it to do that. Like, science works because humans designed a system that was going to work. We weren't going to use a system that didn't. So we found a way of measuring what these regularities are, quantifying them mathematically, and then extracting explanations and predictions from them. That doesn't in any way, shape, or form mean that there has to be an explanation for why those particular regularities are the regularities rather than something else. That, again, that's sort of alluding to the principle of sufficient reason. There has to be some further explanation for why these regularities are the way they are rather than some other way. So that I just, that doesn't see, like, this idea that, well, if you can't tell me why they're regular, then why does science work? Well, because the laws of nature are regular and we have the ability to measure it. Yeah, but why are they regular? Who said there even is a why? There might not be. I don't think there is. Regularities are things humans observe. They're not like, to say that something is regular is just to say that we've measured something to remain constant or symmetric through a number of transformations over time. I don't understand why that would have to be explained by something even further. Not to say that it isn't or can't be, but why should we presume that it is?
So, on either of those views, it's not at all clear, and the argument's very rare.
Actually, Icarus is bringing up a really good question here. The theists don't ever want to stop at nature. They want to post hoc insert God as an explanation for why nature happens to be that it is. But then I think Icarus brings up a good question. Why stop at God? How do you know that there isn't God or super God? And what you'll notice is that the theist just seems to say, well, because I'm just defining God as the ultimate and fundamental thing on which everything else is dependent. Okay, great. Well, then I can just define the universe that way. And there isn't any reason why I can't do that. And that's the thing, is that however you define God to avoid these objections, I can just define the universe that way. And the chance of you being able to give an argument for why that can't be applied to the universe, but it can to God, is really just going to end up amounting to probably some sort of special pleading fallacy or something along those lines. There isn't going to be an argument for why these characteristics can apply to God, and so we can't ask those questions about God, but why we can't say the same thing about the universe and just leave it at that.
Really spell out how it is supposed to be the case that a law of nature can totally replace the role that God is supposed to play as creator and sustainer of the universe. This regularity one has a particular problem with God as sustainer.
I fail to see how. Why should we suppose that the universe needs to be sustained by something external to it to begin with? What's the argument for that? Like, I'm lost here. I don't know what the point is. Like, if the point is that, well, if you're just granting that these patterns are regular, why? But then at that point, you're just running a contingency argument. Why is the universe the way that it is rather than some other way? Well, why should I think that there is a why? I don't understand it. Why should I think that the universe needs to be created or needs to be sustained? It seems that we're just loading a lot of presuppositions into the argument and then claiming the naturalists can't account for it. I disagree.
But maybe, and there's a third view here, and this is going to take us towards, I mean, you knew fine-tuning was coming, all right, because it's me.
Also, just really quickly, I would like to say that, at least for me, I take a law of nature to just be a regularity, symmetry, or consistency observed in the natural world that can be quantified mathematically by humans and used to make predictions about what can be expected in the future.
This is going to head us towards fine-tuning. Perhaps, actually, the idea that the universe is accidental is just the default view. I mean, why suppose that there is a mind behind nature? Why not just say that nature is all there is? Right? An accidental universe is just the simplest starting point, and there's not really any reason to leave that simplifying first assumption. There's a presentation of this view that I particularly like comes from Douglas Adams, the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, who said, and I should memorize this more exactly, but it's basically, can't you just enjoy a garden without having to suppose that there are fairies at the bottom of the garden? Can't you just enjoy a garden without supposing that there are fairies at the bottom of the garden? Meaning, can't you just enjoy the natural world without supposing that there's a God hiding out there somewhere, doing something or other? It's just a simpler way of thinking about the world to think that there's no mind behind it. So why think that there is a mind behind nature? Now, straight away, you have to think, well, it has been the vast... that most people who have ever lived everywhere and at any time, including today, have supposed there is a mind behind nature. Why?
Well, while I wouldn't disagree with that sentiment, I must say, Luke, that is textbook argumentum ad populum. Well, the idea of God being at the bottom of reality has been the most popular idea held by the vast majority of humans that have ever existed, including the majority of scientists. But that doesn't make it true. And you know what? I should be a little bit more charitable here. I guess Luke isn't necessarily arguing that makes the idea true that it's popular, but I think that one could say that maybe he's alluding to the idea that because God's existence has been something believed by the vast majority of humans who have ever lived, that somehow lends merit to the truth of the idea. That I would reject. But in all Jesus, if I could fucking English properly, in all charity to Luke, I don't want to say he is making the argument that because the vast majority of humans have believed that there's a God at the bottom of reality, that makes it more probable that it's true. I think he's just kind of matter-of-factly pointing out that it's something most humans have believed. So I do want to be charitable to Luke. I don't want to say that he's purposefully arguing that this makes it true or more likely to be true. But in the instance that he's trying to insinuate or allude to that, I would say that is an explicit argumentum ad populum.
Do they think that? And the answer's got to have something to do with what they see around them in the world. Now, I assume that video...
Pareidolia? I feel like most of this is probably just going to result in pareidolia. We observe things we observe things in nature that are somewhat analogous to things we know come from agents. Therefore, those things in nature must have come from an agent. Technically, that's a logical fallacy. Which fallacy is that? Because I observe some feature, or because I observe a feature in reality that is analogous to a feature in things created by agents, therefore reality must be created by an agent. I mean, obviously it's a non sequitur because the second part doesn't follow from the first part. What is the that is specifically a fallacy. I'm not going to waste time trying to think about it. It'll come to me at some point.
No, isn't doing the greatest job getting across the internet to you, but hopefully you can see enough of, or you could at least imagine, a hummingbird flying in slow motion. I have to say, when you're talking about design in nature, it's very hard to convince yourself that you shouldn't just shut up and watch this video. I have to say, when you're talking about design in nature,
What I thought Luke said. How do we determine that there's design in nature? What's the standard for determining that? You'll ask a lot of theists, and anybody who's been watching Rebecca's channel, I don't know if she's still in the side chat or not, but anybody who's been watching her channel over the past month or so that has seen people like myself, Danny, Lance Bush on there, this is a point we've all made. You can say that there are things in reality that are designed, but what standard are you using to determine that they're designed? And with respect to what does that standard truly establish that something is designed? It's questions that can't be answered. They really can't. Because again, design is sort of an intentional concept. Again, design is something we understood. Is design is given in terms of what we mean by it, what we understand it to be, not in terms of what we can apply that concept to. And so I think that there's I think with a lot of terms, now that I'm really looking into this and looking into these things, there's a lot of terms out there that theists use where it seems that they're conflating extensions of that terms, or the things to which the term or the concept can be applied, with the intention of that of those terms, which would be the things, or would be the ways in which we understand what the term means. And I just wanted to highlight this comment again because the spelling of intention here is going to be different than intention with a T, which is related to some agent's desire or goal directedness with respect to some standard. So again, the intention as spelled here is what we mean or understand about a concept, and the extension are the things to which the concept could be applied.
very hard to convince yourself that you shouldn't just shut up and watch this video for about 45 minutes and then take questions. What could I possibly have to add to that? I mean, why don't we all just stare at that for a while?
I'm not sure how staring at a slow motion picture of a bird is supposed to like make me believe in God. This seems to be sort of a look at the trees argument. Like, nothing about this bird indicates design because I've never observed a bird being designed. I don't have any prior knowledge or experience of birds being designed. So why would I infer that they are? You see, that's the thing. Design is not something we infer from any of the physical attributes of something. I can hold up my cell phone and everybody that looks at it knows it was made by a human. But you don't know that because the phone has a squarish or rectangular shape. You don't know that because it's thin. You don't know that because there's light on the screen. You don't know that because it uses computation or anything like that. None of those are the reasons that you know that a phone is designed. You know it because you know that humans design phones. It's your prior knowledge or your prior experience that you use to infer that something is designed, not the physical attributes of that thing.
And see if you get some sort of idea about why we think there's design in nature. If I really need to sort of lay it on for you, maybe this helps. This turned up on my Facebook feed. Facebook was trying to sell me this sculpture, and I'm slightly tempted to buy one because that's kind of cool. I mean, why do we think there's design in nature? Well, we look around us and we see nature around us. And
yeah, it's why do we think nature's designed? Well, just look at the trees, guys. Just look at the rocks and look at the water and the birds, and it's just look at it. Just look. I just want you to look at it. Like this is. I'm sorry, but this, and I realize that I might be like parodying what Luke is saying a little bit. I'm being a little facetious. No disrespect to him. I think he's a great guy, but at the same time, like. This isn't an argument. Like you're not telling me anything. You're not. There's nothing informative there. I don't know what to do with the look at the trees and the rocks and the birds and the waves and the clouds and the sunrise. Like that doesn't tell me anything.
I mean, we could just do this for a while if you want. Found a whole bunch of.
I will say that is a pretty neat picture. I've always wanted a driveway like that, and I bet I will never have one because I'm poor. But that's a different story.
Pretty pictures. I mean, there's stuff like that. I mean, we didn't have to make any of this stuff. We just go out there and there it is around us. Wedge-tailed eagle. On the smaller scales, on much larger scales, in all sorts of intricate detail. And this is one of the great joys of being an astronomer, is it's very easy for me to make my PowerPoint presentations better than yours.
I will. Okay, that one was pretty funny. That's the good thing about being an astronomer. It's easy to make my PowerPoint presentations better than yours. Oh, yeah, that was a good one. That one was funny. That one was funny.
Piece of cake. You just go on the Hubble website, pick something good. You can just do this all day. In fact, you should do this. Right, at some point, get a really high-resolution screen, the projector, the Zoom link. This is not doing justice to these pictures.
And one of the things I will say is I've watched quite a few of Luke's presentations. He does add some like facetious stuff like this in there, and I think it's really cool. You know, to add a little bit of humor to it, make it a little bit facetious. Yeah, I think that's good. That's why I like Luke.
Right? Get on the Hubble website. Get the nice high-res version.
And while I'm on the point, I might as well tell you guys, I will do responses to a lot of different people. Just because I'm like doing a response video to somebody doesn't mean I think they're stupid, dumb, or that I dislike them or anything. I might think they have bad arguments, but it doesn't mean I think they're stupid, unintelligent, dumb, moronic, or that I dislike them or anything. Me criticize, I just want to, because this is something that sometimes goes over people's heads. Criticizing arguments doesn't mean I'm criticizing the person. I think Luke is a great person and a phenomenal astrophysicist, knows way more than I will probably ever come to know in my life because he's an actual professional and I'm not even remotely close to that. But I don't think that the fine-tuning argument, even as he presents it, is a good argument. And I want to share my thoughts on it. So I just wanted to point out that me doing the responses, like my last one was to Frank Turek. I don't, at least necessarily, dislike Frank Turek. I don't dislike Luke Barnes. Me doing these kinds of videos and these kinds of this kind of content isn't because I think these people are dumb, stupid, moronic. I think they don't know what they're talking about or that I don't like them. It's just that I want to engage with their arguments because I don't agree with them and share a perspective that is from a different worldview than what they have, and try to do so in a way that is meaningful, engaging, and charitable.
Get a good computer screen, a nice dark room, some Beethoven, and a good port or something, and just sort of enjoy these for a while.
I'd say scotch, but I am with you, Luke.
Again, it's hard not to convince yourself that we should just do this for like half an hour. That's two interacting galaxies, by the way. We see the trails coming in, and that's two galaxies colliding. That's a ring of star formation around an old galaxy. Yeah, anyway, look. If that's the case, if we see such amazing order in the universe, and we understand what natural processes do, and we've put aside this idea that if I've explained, if there's a scientific explanation and that's precluded the idea that there's design, then we quickly come to the idea that if the natural world is amazing, then the natural processes that have shaped the natural world are probably rather amazing too. So then the person who wants to argue that the universe is an accident is going to have to say, actually, no, we have to consider the possibility, what if the physical processes that shaped our world are boring and unexceptional and unremarkable and typical? What if there's nothing actually interesting?
Well, again, amazing isn't like an objective thing or a feature that could be determined objectively. And that's something that we need to remember. Amazing with respect to what standard? What standard are you using to say that you're amazed by it or you're in awe? That's what it means. Amazing is more a term that describes our reaction to something. It doesn't actually describe what that thing is. So while I might find all the pictures and all the structures and everything in the complexity and the order amazing and awesome, all that's describing is how I see those things. It isn't describing anything about what they actually are. So things being amazing in the universe, I'm sorry to say, doesn't mean anything for either atheism or theism.
As we go down to the bottom level of the universe, as Dawkins invited us to do. When Dawkins explains why there is at least the appearance of design in the universe, what he asks himself is, what happens if you throw cells together at random, coming to the conclusion then you'll never make anything that flies. The way that you see weather.
Is that true, though? Like, is it? I could imagine that it's to me, this is sort of a tornado through the junkyard assembles a Ferrari argument. Nobody's going to say that a tornado doing that is going to actually assemble a Ferrari. But I don't think anybody can say that it is logically impossible. I would say that it's probably, well, metaphysically impossible is still a fairly strong claim to make there. But I think it could probably be defended reasonably that it might be metaphysically impossible for, something. It doesn't have to be this exact scenario, but something along the lines of the tornado through a junkyard assembles a Ferrari. Probably not going to happen, but it's not impossible. But the thing is that people hear somebody saying, well, it's not impossible, as them saying, well, it's entirely likely. No, something's being possible does not and has no bearing, makes no statements about its probability, because possibility, probability, and then plausibility are all completely different things. Well, they're related, but they are technically different. Possibility refers to, well, generally it depends on the mode, the modal term you're using, but more often than not, possibility refers to the logical capability of something. Can a thing happen? Are there internal contradictions in the state of affairs obtaining or becoming the case? No, then it's possible. Probable, how likely, what is the value of expectation of the obtention of this event or this event becoming the case? That's going to be probability, the value of expecting it to occur, the expectation value or the likelihood of its occurrence. And then plausibility, at least as I understand it, don't necessarily quote me on it, but plausibility, as I understand it, is how reasonable is it to think that something can happen. So something could be probable, but not necessarily plausible, where sure actually no, not I got my words mixed up. Something can be possible but not plausible, where it can happen but it's not reasonable to expect it. So for instance, a tornado going through a junkyard and assembling at least something that looks like a Ferrari. Oh, it doesn't even have to be a Ferrari. A tornado going through a junkyard and assembling an operable motor vehicle. It is possible. It can happen. It's just not something that's reasonable to expect to happen. So it's possible, but it isn't probable. But I don't want to get into the depths of probability theory here. So let's continue.
Something looks designed is to one way that you can approach that is to say, what happens if you just throw it together at random? So he is a biologist, and so doing things at a biological level, you're throwing the basic units of biology, which are cells, just throw those together and see if anything interesting comes out. And he knows that it won't. Okay, so don't there's no straw man of evolution here. This is not how evolution is supposed to work. That's the whole point of Dawkins' books, right? It is not a random process. But if we're shifting the burden of showing that the natural world is not designed down to physics, we need to ask the question, what happens if you throw a universe together at random? Now, it's at this point where we have a chance, actually, within theoretical physics, of throwing a universe together at random. If we look at the fundamental laws as we know them of the universe around us, the deepest laws of nature that we have discovered and confirmed with experiment, we find that there are fundamental properties of the universe, like how heavy is an electron and how fast is the universe expanding and all those sorts of things. So we have a chance to take those fundamental properties and mess with them a bit, to essentially throw a universe together at random by changing those properties and seeing what would happen in the universe. This leads to what is known as the fine-tuning of the universe for life. Now, you're here.
I just want to say, again, I would need to know what we mean particularly by random here. I know that Luke kind of defined it earlier in terms of the Kamehameha stuff, but I would need to have it explained to me, because maybe I'm just stupid, maybe I just don't understand this or something like that. But I don't know in what sense like randomness. I mean, if the universe is random in the sense of the Kologramov or whatever it was that he said earlier, I can never fucking pronounce that name correct. Like, I'm gonna look it up and try to get it right. I didn't even spell it right. Kolmogorov. Okay, Kolmogorov. Okay, I think I've got it. Yeah, I just don't see how a fine-tuning argument would turn on. I just forgot it again. Wow, this is really. What did I just do? What did I just? Oh wait, I didn't do anything at all. Okay. Okay, I didn't do anything at all. I hit a button on my laptop and I don't know why it's doing 1.5 million things. What the hell is this? What? Random things that happen during your stream. That's the theme today, I guess. Kolmogorov. So the Kolmogorov. Sorry about the pause there. I never used to be bad with like words and names, and it's just gotten worse as I've gotten older. Well, it's not that it's gotten worse because it was never bad to begin with, but it's gotten bad. Kolmogorov randomness. I just don't see how a fine-tuning argument would turn on that. I just because it seems that under even that definition, randomness is still an intentional concept. It's not given in terms of what we can apply the concept of randomness to. It's given in terms of what we mean when we say random. Two different people can look at the same thing. One thinks it's random and one thinks it's not. I don't think there's going to be an objective determination there. So I guess my question here would be, I don't see, or in what sense does a fine-tuning argument turn on Kolmogorov randomness? I'm failing to understand that.
At a conference on apologetics. I assume you know at least something about this. So I want to take one case of fine-tuning and go in depth, in detail, rather than give you an overview, which you may have heard before. But there is one particular number which I think is the best case of fine-tuning, called the cosmological constant. Here's how it works. In cosmology, we want to know what the universe as a whole is doing. The most important force on large scales, on sort of cosmological scales, on scales in which we can see across the universe, is gravity. So what we do is we start by specifying or guessing at what the universe is made of, how much of it is there, the densities, of ordinary matter, There is evidence from our observation of the universe that there is a form of matter which is not ordinary matter, but which is not sending light towards us. We call that dark matter. There's also light. There are other fundamental particles called neutrinos hanging around. We hope that that list is almost full, because what we're going to do is take that list of stuff and we feed it into a great big box called general relativity, which is Einstein's idea about how gravity works, which has been fantastically successful. Anyway, what's in this box is a whole bunch of maths, right? And mathematics has an S at the end, so it is plural. And
yeah, while that is true, it's not maths ematics, it's mathematics. So to abbreviate the term would just be math. The word math can be both singular and plural, much the same way the word deer can be singular and plural. The same way moose. I saw a moose. Look at those moose. It can be both singular and plural. Geometry is a type of math. Analysis, algebra, and number theory are types of math. So while mathematics is a plural term, it's not mathematics, so it wouldn't be abbreviated to maths. It would be abbreviated to math, which would be both the singular and plural form in shorthand of mathematics. And I'm actually getting this from a linguist. God, what the fuck was her name? I'm not going to remember. Anyway, yeah, that's what she said, is that technically in English, from purely a rule-based perspective, it would still be math, and math as an abbreviation or a shortening could be both singular or plural.
What happened?
Just like geometry could be. Geometry is a type of mathematics. You wouldn't say geometry is a mathematic. I mean, you could, but most people aren't going to say it that way. But you could say geometry is a type of mathematics. And then you could say like geometry, number theory, and calculus are types of mathematics. So even mathematics with an S on the end could still be understood as a singular. Anyway, we're way off topic. Let me just let me just play this video.
What happens then is general relativity. Once you turn the big handle of all that maths, which is a bunch of fun, depending on your view of fun, it'll tell you how the universe expands, in particular how it expands as a function of time, how quickly it's getting bigger. And
that would be the time derivative of the scale factor, I believe, is what he's referring to there. That the scale factor gives I believe, the size of the universe, and you take the first derivative or the second derivative with respect to time. I'd have to look at I think it's t dot, but it might be t double dot. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, yeah, I mean, this all lines up with everything that at least I know.
What that tells you is a whole bunch of stuff about how the things in the universe react to that expansion. So, for example, how light travels through space, the way that it is bent and redshifted and fades and all those sorts of things, and how structure forms, and all of that is wonderful and fantastic stuff. As we have made observations of the universe, we've been able to turn these sort of arrows around by studying how light travels through space. We've been able to find out something about the way the universe expands. In 1998, we discovered that the expansion of the universe is, in fact, accelerating. If you look out there at a galaxy in the distance, it's not just moving away from us. We've known that the universe is expanding since the 1920s. But it's getting faster. It's moving faster today than it was yesterday, on average. And if you then reverse the arrows back to what then the universe must be made of, all this stuff, even dark matter, that we're familiar with, will not make the expansion of the universe accelerate. So something else must go into this mix. There's got to be something else in this list of stuff that we've missed. In fact, there's a number which you can think of as being a component of the universe. We won't go into the details there. Called the cosmological constant, which Einstein proposed back when he was proposing general relativity. We're talking about the 10s and 20s. And it will do that for you. There's a number you put in which doesn't behave like any form of matter or energy that we're familiar with already, But if you put this cosmological constant on this list here and then run forwards, you end up with a universe that accelerates and which will then explain how light travels through space. Okay, what consequences does that have for the universe? Well, that tells us something about the way that the universe forms structure. I have no idea whether this looks as good to you as it does to me on the screen, but this is a simulation of how structure forms in the universe done on a supercomputer in Durham in England, part of it's called the Eagle collaboration. Let me try and describe it just in case it's not coming particularly well through the video. The short story is that if you take a piece of the universe and you simulate it with a supercomputer, any bump or any bit of the universe which is more dense than average will collect more than its fair share of matter and continue collecting more of its fair share of matter as it draws things in. So this is a representation of our universe, which has a cosmological constant in it, but it doesn't much change the amount of structure that forms in the universe. What you see here at the end is called the cosmic web, the very densest bits of the universe, and then surrounded by voids where there's nothing, where things have fallen somewhere else by the pull of gravity. And then these strands in between them, which haven't quite decided which way they want to go yet. There is the cosmic web. So my collaborators, including some people at Durham running exactly this simulation, have changed these numbers behind the simulation to see what the universe would do. And the answer is you increase the cosmological constant, you're going to see three panels here. On the left, structure is going to form as it always does, as it does roughly the same as our universe. However, if you put more of this accelerating stuff, cosmological constant, into the universe, it drives everything away from everything else in the universe. That process by which gravity brings things together to make galaxies and inside galaxies, stars and all that sort of stuff basically fails the larger the cosmological constant is. And if you make it very large compared to our universe, you end up with a universe where every single proton, the most that ever happens is another lonely proton comes past, and then that's about it. Let me just spend 2 or 3 minutes telling you why this is such an important case of fine-tuning, and then wrap this thing up and leave it open for questions in the last 15 minutes-ish. Why the cosmological constant is such a problem? Well, the answer is it's actually several problems. One of the best ways of explaining what this cosmological constant is, I mean, the cosmological constant is just a number. The question is, what fact about the world, about nature, does it actually represent? And there's an idea that actually what it represents is something called vacuum energy, which sounds cool and turns up in a whole lot of sci-fi movies from people who don't know what it is. But very roughly, the description we have of matter around us, the best description we have, which passes the most experimental tests, is called quantum field theory. And what it says, for example, for what an electron really is a ripple in a field which is everywhere in the universe. And as that ripple travels, that appears to us to be an electron. So there's a way to arrange the field so it's one electron rippling this way, and another way to arrange it so it's an electron rippling that way. And there's a way to arrange it so that it's 2 electrons or 10 electrons or 1,000 electrons or electrons going around your atoms or whatever. And there's a way to arrange the field so that there's no electrons at all, and that's called the vacuum configuration of the field. So there are no particles there.
I just want to say what Luke means by the vacuum state of the field is the state at which it's essentially the field as it sits at thermal equilibrium, the field at its lowest possible energy state where there are no excitations or perturbations in it. That's often referred to as the vacuum state of a field.
But there still is a field there. If that field has energy associated with it, when you then feed that into general relativity, into gravity, it will act like a cosmological constant and make the expansion of the universe accelerate, where the acceleration could be negative. It could be, which is very quick deceleration. The thing is, if you take a sort of back of the envelope rough calculation of how big we might expect that amount of energy to be, you get an enormously large number which would totally destroy the universe.
this is called the vacuum catastrophe problem, that when we calculate from quantum field theory what the vacuum energy should be, it's so astronomically large that our universe shouldn't look anything like it does. Obviously, something is wrong, and at least thus far, we don't, I think, really know what it is that's wrong. But what we actually measure for the cosmological constant, and then what the calculations via quantum field theory tell us it should be, are wildly in disagreement with one another. So
much more than we saw in those previous panels. And the problem is that vacuum energy is associated with all of the fields that we know of in the universe. So it's not just one field which has the potential to blow the universe apart. It's all of them, all of the fundamental constants. So not just the electron, but the quarks and all the other things in there as well. So it's actually several problems, not just one problem. General relativity won't help, as I showed you with those arrows. The arrows about what the universe is made of lead into the relativity box. So general relativity doesn't tell you what the universe is made of. It tells you if the universe is made of this, then it will expand in a certain way. But it can't tell us, no, you can't have that ridiculously fast expanding universe. There's no principle of relativity that could tell us that, because it doesn't tell you what the universe is made of. Particle physics probably won't help because our understanding of those fields that we feed in, right, from the first box, not the second one, it probably won't help because it's only sensitive to differences in energy between this state and that state. So, bang these things together, the difference in energy from here to there. It's only interested in relative energies, whereas general relativity is interested in a absolute energy. And so it's blind to the effect that it has on the expansion of the universe. Now, famously, actually, general relativity and particle physics, quantum mechanics, don't quite know how to talk to each other. In particular, we don't really know how to do a quantum theory of gravity, but we think that's relevant at extremely high energies or high densities or in the very early universe, very high temperatures. But this cosmological constant isn't just a problem in those circumstances, so quantum gravity won't necessarily help. We know enough of the physics in the regimes where we think we know the physics to know that this is a problem without it just being fixed at some very high energy. If you try to add something else into the mix to explain some form of dark energy that explains the accelerating expansion, well, that's probably just another field. And so that has exactly the same problem that we had before. You might think, oh, maybe there's some deep symmetry of the universe which sets the accelerating components all to zero. But since 1998, we've known that the cosmological constant as measured is not in fact zero, so that solution is out. There's a theory of the very early universe called inflation, which says that a very rapid...
So I did want to say, I was kind of doing a little reading because I just wanted to make sure that what I thought was true. I'm just going to read really quickly from Wikipedia on the proposed solutions part to the cosmological constant problem that is on the cosmological constant problem page. Other proposals involve modifying gravity to diverge from general relativity. These proposals face the hurdle that the results of observations and experiments so far have tended to be extremely consistent with general relativity and the lambda CDM model, or the concordance model, the standard model of cosmology, so to speak, and inconsistent with thus far proposed modifications. But though that would largely be, I think, modifications relating to like modified Newtonian dynamics and not necessarily with respect to quantum gravity, because we don't actually know how general relativity would be modified in those instances, which is part of the reason why we haven't actually been capable of unifying quantum mechanics and general relativity. In addition, some of the proposals are arguably incomplete because they solve the hit myself in the face. The new cosmological constant problem by proposing that the actual cosmological constant is exactly zero rather than a very tiny number, but fail to solve the old cosmological constant problem of why quantum fields seem to fail to produce substantial vacuum energy in the first place. Nevertheless, many physicists argue that, due in part to a lack of better alternatives, proposals to modify gravity should be considered, quote, one of the most promising routes to tackling, end quote, the cosmological constant problem. And this is given by Philip Bull et al., June 2016, and Beyond Lambda CDM Problem Solutions in the Road Ahead. So at least with respect to the slide he had up before, where quantum gravity isn't a solution, it seems most physicists disagree with that. They think that quantum gravity probably is the easiest way for providing a solution to this. But I also want to say that I could grant that all the things that Luke said aren't going to give us reasonable solutions. I could grant that he's correct, but that doesn't in any way mean that there isn't a solution out there or that we can't find it. It just means that humans are very limited still in the understanding that we have of reality, particularly at its most fundamental levels, where we just have the least amount of technology capable of probing and understanding it. So for me, the vacuum catastrophe or the cosmological constant problem, I mean, it's a problem in the sense we don't have a solution to it, but it's not something I think that is only going to be solved by appealing to some sort of supernatural or non-natural intentional agency that we know nothing about and don't even know if it exists. There was also in the chat from Doubting Thomas, is this guy a physicist, a theist? Yes, this is Luke Barnes, who has a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics, I believe, from the University of Cambridge. And he currently works as a research astrophysicist or a research cosmologist at, I believe it's the University of Sydney, and he is a theist. So he is a legitimate physicist on top of being a legitimate theist as well. So he is certainly somebody that can be trusted with respect to a lot of these things. He's not a quack. He's not like a Frank Turek type. He's not a creationist. He's not one of these whack job idiot theists like Jason Lyle that doesn't know what he's talking about. Luke Barnes knows what he's talking about.
Acceleration happened in the very, very early universe. If that's true, then you can't have any general principle saying very quick accelerations are out, because one of them actually happened. So that's a whole bunch of solutions.
The problem that I have with this number 7 is then life prohibiting acceleration is physically possible. But why is its ability to permit or prohibit life important? Why not prohibit black holes or stars or electrons or pizza or any of the other myriad of phenomena we observe in reality? And this is one of the issues I have with the fine-tuning argument. Because the version that Luke would present is similar to the version that like Robin Collins would present, sort of a Bayesian probabilistic approach where the probability of a fine-tuning, or rather the probability of a life-permitting universe given theism is greater than the probability of a life-permitting universe given, like, say, naturalism. But the thing is why life permitting? Why is life the feature we're centering this discussion around? What's the argument for that? Why isn't it black hole permitting or star permitting or galaxy permitting or electron permitting or Higgs boson permitting or pizza permitting or, again, any of the other myriad of phenomena and structures and things that we see in reality? Why life? There's never an argument outside of, well, we're life given for that. Just because we're life doesn't mean we're somehow important, expected, or intended in the universe. And it seems that we're going to need an argument for why that's the case in order to say that the universe is life permitting. Yeah, but it's also permitting of everything else that exists within it. The universe is also prohibiting to everything that doesn't exist within it. So I just don't understand why life is somehow a feature that can be put over and above any of the other observed features of reality. I've never heard an argument for that, at least not one that I find convincing.
Which go down the drain there as well. You might be thinking that this idea of the quantum vacuum is very speculative and untested, but actually that calculation of the vacuum energy is known to be correct in some other environments. We can do the same sort of calculation elsewhere, and we get a very correct answer. And by that, I mean an answer we can test with experiment. There's also an obviously very strong anthropic limit. If no two particles in the universe ever stick to each other, then there's no way you're getting life. Whatever you
And while I obviously I agree with that, it just raises the question, but why is life the standard against which we're looking at the structure that the universe has and whether or not it's fine-tuned? And then that raises the question of what particularly we mean by fine-tuning. I think Luke Barnes would just give the definition most physicists use, that something is fine-tuned if we have to very, very precisely adjust free parameters in order for the model to actually accord with the predictions, or not accord with the observations that we make. You would say that those free parameters are fine-tuned into those values. But I don't see how God turns on that definition of fine-tuning. I don't see how that definition of fine-tuning means anything for the universe, or what we ought to expect its parametric structure, the values that are had for the various parameters that our universe operates under. What's the I don't understand. I'm not understanding why life is the feature against which we're measuring what the parameters ought to or ought not to look like. Or, well, if we look at the parameters, they permit life. Okay, but why their ability to permit life? What is so important or special about life? I don't think one can argue, well, we're life. Well, sure, but that doesn't mean that it's special or important. You might think that it's special or important, but I don't necessarily need to think that. And the fact that life arises in the universe, I don't think is in and of itself evidence that that was intended or a goal-directed outcome of the universe. And I don't think that that us having to fine-tune certain free parameters in our models, that is primarily a result of us having incomplete models, and not that those parameters have to be that way, in some sense means that the universe was structured specifically so that life life exists in our universe. And I just wanted to highlight this, as I agree. I also think that's where he's going.
Your definition of life is. A whole bunch of objections to the fine-tuning argument just go completely out the door. So the question then is, are the physical processes that shaped our world boring and remarkable and unremarkable and simple and typical? And
well, whether it's those things or not, again, I think it's not an objective. There's not an objective answer to that. I think it's just going to depend on who you're talking to and their particular intuitions or expectations for what the universe may have looked like. I'm not surprised that a theist would look at life arising in the universe and say, I think that happened because there was a God that expected it to happen, and so structured the universe such that it would. Yeah, it's fine that you think that. There's nothing wrong with that. But why should I be committed to that? What's the argument for me being committed to that idea? When you say boring, simple, unremarkable, and typical, what exactly is being expressed by those terms? Again, those seem to be terms that are normative. They only mean something with respect to some standard that's used to evaluate those terms. And I think that those standards are going to differ depending on who you ask. There isn't an objective fact of the matter about whether these processes are boring, amazing, simple, complex, unremarkable, remarkable, typical, or unexpected. I just don't think that there's an objective answer or standard there.
And the answer we get from all the fine-tuning cases, not just the cosmological constant, is quite clearly no.
So, yeah, but with respect to that standard, perhaps your conclusion would be no. But I would look at the constants and parameters of reality and probably conclude, well, I think what I would conclude is that, like, words like boring, simple, unremarkable, typical, all those kinds of sort of normative terminology is not what I'm going to use in terms of describing the universe, at least not outside of my own personal opinion. And I don't want to say this in a sense of like downplaying the legitimacy of Luke's argument, because I do think Luke is presenting a legitimate argument here. I just disagree with its conclusions. But I feel like it's more of his opinion that they're not boring, simple, unremarkable, and typical. I don't know that there's a standard one could consider as objective against which we could measure that.
You go and just choose any old universe by accident, you almost certainly get one which has a wonderfully simple, expanding, accelerating space-time, and no particles ever stick together. So there's three approaches there to why I think that the universe is an accident. It's actually quite hard to find out what the argument is supposed to be. The one from randomness didn't see the difference between randomness as it would need to be to affect God and randomness as it actually is in the physical sciences. The argument from the laws of nature, well, it needs something stronger than what Carroll offers, the regularities law of nature, which is just looking at patterns in what we see around us. If you're going to replace God with the laws of nature, you better tell us what a law of nature really is. And the idea that accidental universe is just a default, it falls afoul of the fact that we see very obviously around us a universe that looks very well put together. And that intuition goes as
Well, but I guess that would beg the question: what does a well put together universe look like? And if you say, well, it looks like ours, then that's seems almost like begging the question, because what's being asked is what is the standard against which we would measure a universe to determine whether or not it's well put together. And if you just say, well, this universe, well, but that's the same universe we're asking the question to. So to just presume it about that universe is textbook begging the question. Again, I'm not saying that this is what Luke is doing, just offering my perspectives to answers I think that I would expect from a theist. Probably not from Luke, because Luke is a pretty sophisticated person. He's not like, your Discord or your Clubhouse theists. So I think he would probably provide a more meaningful answer there, but I don't think it would necessarily be one I couldn't provide another objection to. But yeah, what standard are we using to determine whether the universe is well put together? What does that term even mean? Would be my questions there.
As deep into physics, which is what fine tuning shows, as you could want to go.
And just really quickly, with respect to the other things he said, the first one, I agree with him. I don't think that the randomness argument works, simply because I think randomness is sort of a some sort of intentional or maybe even normative term. It's not like there isn't an objective standard for what it means to be random. With respect to the laws of nature, I think that one can work, because I think that one can just reject the principle of sufficient reason and argue that the fundamental parameters or constants of reality are just nomological. That's just the way they are, with no further explication or a reason or account for why they are that way. There is no why. They just most literally are that way. They're just brute contingencies. And the third one I don't think works, because the third, his third objection, the argument that, well, the universe just kind of being the way that it is, and just kind of being this boring kind of universe where life just happens to arise, is sort of the default. I don't think his objection really works to that, because again, what do we mean when we say that the universe is well put together, and what standard do we use for determining that?
Let me finish with a quote. We should be astonished by nature's regularity, says Henri Poincaré, a very famous physicist in 1905. Men demand of their gods to prove their existence by miracles, but the eternal marvel is that there are not miracles without cease. The world is divine because it is a harmony. If it were ruled by caprice, what could prove to us that it was not ruled by chance?
Yeah, I would just call that another quote mine. I don't really care what Henri Poincaré has to say. We know significantly more than he did at his time. And a quote like this isn't really saying anything than what some person who already kind of believed in God thinks about the universe. It's just Henri Poincaré's opinion about regularity in nature. But again, Luke never, and I, obviously that he wasn't in a debate here, so I mean, it wasn't necessarily expected of him. But he didn't really explicate why there has to be why there is regularity, and why there can't just be regularity as a brute. I understand that that might not be satisfactory as an answer, but I don't think that it's somehow like an inconsistent or incoherent answer, just perhaps unsatisfactory.
And I'll stick my books on the screen and say thank you very much.
All right, so that's the video. I'm not going to go through Q&A, just because I just really don't want to. Q&As oftentimes aren't very interesting to me. Sometimes, you can, there's some, but I'm not going to go through it. So I think Luke presented a reasonable argument here. I think it was a decent argument to present. I think personally that the fine tuning argument, particularly the sort of a Bayesian probabilistic style, is in my opinion, is probably the strongest argument in favor of God's existence. But that's not to say that I don't think that there are reasonable objections to it. I didn't get to all the objections I have with fine-tuning or teleological arguments in this video, namely because Luke didn't bring them all up, and I didn't want to come off as if I was somehow maybe straw manning him or something. And if there was at any point where it seemed like I was doing that in the video, even if perhaps I was, that wasn't my intention. I doubt Luke will watch this, but maybe he will if he does, and he thought that maybe I was straw manning him or misrepresenting him. Even if it is the case that I was doing that, I was not in any sense my my intention. My intention was just to express why I think that this argument isn't, well, I think it's probably the strongest argument for God's existence, is still not enough to convince personally me. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it, this second installment of Apologetics Analyzed. I thought this was a really good video. And I after I did the first one, I was like, what do I want to do for the second one? And I was thinking, well, you know what? I'd like to do something on the fine-tuning argument. That isn't something I've really touched on in any video, along with some other things that I will get to. And I thought that, I said Luke Barnes is probably one of the premier defenders of it, if not the premier defender of the fine-tuning argument. And he had a short video that was short by certain standards that he did on the argument at the CCV1. Why don't I just review that and go over his argument? And so that's what this was. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking around with me, and I will see you on the next installment of, well, whatever in video or series I decide to contribute to next. I don't actually know what I'm going to do next. Actually, I do. I'm going to do another. I know I just earlier this week put out a bad science communication, the 4th installment. But I saw another article that I wasn't really fond of the way it communicated the idea it was trying to communicate. So I'm probably going to do a response to that. Might get that out. If I don't get it out this weekend, I'll try to get that done on Monday. So that'll probably be the next thing that comes up on the channel. But until then, you guys take it easy. Enjoy the rest of your evenings. And as always, per causam nos perfectum, or through reason we progress. And just for those who may be wondering, it is Latin. But yes, through reason we progress, because thinking about things is the best way to move forward and the best way to figure out how we should think about the world. You guys take it easy.